it's an open discussion.
Okay.
And we pick a particular topic and then read through the article. Some article, this happens to be a longer article. Some articles are only like one day. And yeah. There's no real instructors here. Everybody here, students, some people are longer than others. But, yeah. And did you know anything about Theosophy before you came here? Or before you walked in?
No.
Okay.
Or to us, I wanted to hear what he said.
Oh, it's still pleasant. That's okay. Okay, well, why don't we go through the declaration? Oh, time warp.
Yeah. Yeah, I think you can just close that.
Some declarations. I think there might be some,
Yeah.
any of the neon, yeah, colored pamphlets.
Hi, Marianne.
Marion,
Hello, hello, hello.
Yeah.
okay, so we're gonna start with the declaration.
Yeah.
The policy of this lodge is independent devotion to the cause of Theosophy without professing attachment to any theosophical organization. It is loyal to the great founders of the Theosophical movement, but does not concern itself with dissensions or differences of individual opinion. The work it has on hand and the end it keeps in view are too absorbing, too lofty to leave it for time or inclination to take part in side issues. That work and that end is the dissemination of the fundamental principles of the philosophy of Theosophy and the exemplification in practice of those principles through a truer realization of the self, a profounder conviction of universal brotherhood. It holds that the unassailable basis for union among Theosophists, wherever and however situated, is similarity of aim, purpose, and teaching, and therefore, bylaws nor officers, the sole bond between its associates being that basis. And it aims to disseminate this idea among Theosophists in the furtherance of unity. It regards as Theosophists all who are engaged in the true service of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, condition, or organization. And it welcomes to its association all those who are in accord with its declared purposes and who desire to fit themselves by study and otherwise to be better able to help and teach others. The true Theosophist belongs to no cult or sect, yet belongs to each and all. And the following may be signed by associates of the United Lodge. Being in sympathy with the purposes of this lodge, as set forth in its declaration, I hereby record my desire to be enrolled as an associate. It being understood that such association calls for no obligation on my part other than that which I myself determine. So that's kind of the mission statement of the lodge.
And then inside the pamphlet, it has the three objects of the Theosophical movement. First, one, to form a nucleus of universal brotherhood of humanity without distinction of race, creed, sex, caste, or color. And two, the study of ancient and modern religions, philosophies, and sciences, and the demonstration of the importance of such study. And then three, the investigations of the unexplained laws of nature and the psychical powers latent in man. So the article that we've been going through the last week, 2 weeks, I guess, is called Psychic and Noetic Action. And we went through the first part, which mainly dealt with psychic action. And from a theosophical perspective, there's the 7 principles of man, but also 7 principles in the cosmos. There's our physical body, or the planets that we see, and everything else that has an objective physical body. There's an astral body or electromagnetic body that the physical body is on. There's energy that animates it. And then there's Kama, which is the desire principle. And all the kingdoms have all these 4 principles. The next one is mind. And mind in man is twofold. It's spiritual mind, that we could say is the mind of our reincarnating soul, and psychic mind, which is the personality's expression of mind. And then there's Buddhi, which is universal consciousness and intelligence through the whole universe, and we are linked to that or have an array of it. And then there's spirit, which is the source of everything, or the animating principle that all the principles are derived from. And so this article, Psychic and Noetic Action, is describing both psychology and physiology at the time of how science looked at mind
In the
And
late 1800s.
in the late 1800s, and the brain, and then the occult understanding and laws of how there's a difference. Okay, so someone want to read? We're just ending the first part of the first article of the article. Psychic and Noetic Action. Where
Start at actually at how closely this last assumption.
what page in the pamphlet? 19.
Yeah.
So on page 19, right under the italics paragraph, says how closely this last assumption, and we'll go to where it says Room 2. We'll start the next one. You want to read?
Beginning, you go ahead.
Okay, I'll start with the above, the italics. So we can connect what we're gonna read today,
Okay.
where it says, on the whole, the history of each individual's experience is such as requires the assumption that a real unit being, a mind, is undergoing a process of development in relation to the changing condition of evolution of the brain, and yet in accordance with the nature and laws of itself. How closely this last assumption of science approaches the teachings of the occult philosophy will be shown in part 2 of this article. Meanwhile, we may close with an answer to the latest materialistic fallacy, which may be summarized in a few words. As every psychic action has for its substratum the nervous elements whose existence it postulates, and outside which it cannot act, as the activity of the nervous elements are only molecular motion. There is therefore no need to invent a special psychic force for the explanation of our brain work. Free will would force science to postulate an invisible theory, a creator, that is special force. I'm sorry, you're going to read, right? And you keep going. Yes.
I can read it if you
Okay.
want.
Oh, okay.
We agree not the slightest need of a creator of that special or any other force, nor has anyone ever claimed such an absurdity. But between creating and guiding, there is a difference, and the latter implies in no way any creation of the energy of motion, or indeed of any special energy. Psychic mind, in contradistinction to monastic or noetic mind, only transforms this energy of the unit being according to a natural and laws of its own, to use Ladd's delicious expression. The unit being creates nothing, but only causes a natural correlation in accordance with both the physical laws and the laws of its own, having to use the force that guides its direction, choosing the paths along which it will proceed, and stimulating it to action. And as its activity is sui generis and independent, it carries this energy from this world of disharmony into its own sphere of harmony. Were it not independent, it could not do so. As it is, the freedom of man's will is beyond doubt or prevail. Therefore, as already observed, there is no question of creation, but simply of guidance. Because the sailor at the wheel does not create the steam in the engine, shall we say that he does not direct the vessel? And because we refuse to accept the fallacies of some psychophysiologists as the last word of science, do we furnish thereby a new proof that free will is an hallucination? We deride the animalistic idea. How far more scientific and logical, besides being as poetical as it is grand, is the teaching of the Katha Upanishad, which is a beautiful and descriptive metaphor, says that the senses are the horses, body is the chariot, mind, kama manas, or the desire principle, as the reins, and intellect or free will as the charioteer. Verily, there is more exact science in the less important of the Upanishads, composed thousands of years ago, than in all the materialistic ravings of modern physiobiology and psychophysiology put together. We keep going.
Any questions or comments before we get into the second half?
It's fascinating how you can put like the chariot and the rider. It's all metaphorical, but it's fascinating how they put that together.
Yeah, because it's a very practical way to think about what these scientists and biologists are talking about. And they use this Upanishad statement to point out, like, this is what we're talking about, and think about it from your own experience level. Who is it that is making your body go and do things that it's doing? Does it just happen? Is it the chemicals in your brain that causes you to want to be a doctor and someone else a car racer? I mean, that doesn't make sense. There has to be some intelligence behind that's directing it into a direction that it's going to go.
I would think chaos theory has something to do with this.
In what way?
Kind of like the butterfly effect. One chain, it's like a chain of reactions that causes something to happen or somebody to become who they are.
But who do you think is the butterfly
That's
that's causing that action?
consciousness.
And see, that's what the article is about.
Yeah.
It's that behind the personality is another aspect of consciousness that is working through the personality. You can come on in. We we think about, oh, come on, there's seats at the table. You guys, will you make space?
Yeah.
So that's like what the article is getting to. It's like there's a lot of different descriptions of what is free will and is free will really free, but the whole importance that she's trying to get behind this article and these two articles is that you have two kinds of will. You have the personal, what we think is personal free will, which is affected by our heredity, it's affected by our schooling, it's affected by our experiences. But then you have this other aspect of soul that in a sense has caused the personality to come into a particular circumstance in life by reincarnation. that is the higher aspect of that personality. It's, it's the same thing as like, you go see a play, and someone is playing a character in the play, but the person in the play is a different entity. They're expressing a particular idea through the actor that they're becoming in the play. But in reality, that's not who they are. It's just who they are in that play. And that's why they use this Upanishad statement. It's like, okay, well, that lower mind is the reins, or we could say the leash that's controlling the horses. The horses are your experience and passions that, your senses bring into you. But the person driving the chariot is the soul that is trying to guide that chariot in a particular direction. And so sometimes we can get kind of lost in all the scientific jargon and say, oh yeah, that makes sense. But then when we see it presented in a more practical form, we'll say, well, that makes a little more sense, or does that really relate? That's how we got to look at it.
Another thing is too, there are a lot of studies, like when people start to meditate or have like a more realization, they study the brain and show that different parts light up. And so, do you think, well, is that possible that the biology, the neurons could be causing that change? Or is it the free will of the person that's causing the change in the biology? To me, it seems more reasonable to think it's the free will of the mind that's changing the biology and the neurons, to change in different parts of the brain to light up when they do these experiments. It doesn't seem like it's the other way around, like, oh, all of a sudden the brain is starting to change, and change even like pathways by itself. There seems to be like the free will's got to be directing that.
Yeah, the brain seems kind of just like a conduit for electricity, these little connections.
Neurons, yeah.
Also, in this case, if the senses are the horses, it seems like most of the times we just let the horses go. We're not really, we're not in charge of the reins. We just,
We're just riding.
Yeah, we're just riding, wherever the senses take us. And so the idea is that then, in this case, where it says kama manas, which is mind and desire, it has to be with the psychic action. And therefore, still, we need the free will or the challenger to really direct the forces. And that's where the free will or the will in the person, it has to act and direct the forces, wherever is the best way to go. Otherwise, the horses symbolizing the senses, they just, they just take us anywhere.
It's kind of where that phrase "Jesus takes the wheel" came from.
Okay, should we go on? All right, man. Wanna read?
Part 2. The knowledge of the past, present, and future is embodied in the Kshetrajna, the self. Having explained in what particulars and why, as occultists, we disagree with materialistic physiological psychology, we may now proceed to point out the difference between psychic and noetic mental functions. The noetic not being recognized by official science. Moreover, we Theosophists understand the terms psychic and psychism somewhat differently from the average public, science, and even theology. The latter giving it a significance which both science and theosophy reject. and the public in general remaining with a very hazy conception of what is really meant by the terms. For many, there's little if any difference between psychic and psychological, both words relating in some way to the human soul. Some modern metaphysicians have wisely agreed to disconnect the word mind, pneuma, from soul, psyche. The one being the rational spiritual part, the other psyche, the living principle in man, the breath that animates him, from anima, soul. Yet if this is so, how in this case refuse a soul to animals? There are no less than man informed with the same principle of sentient life, the nefesh of the second chapter of Genesis. The soul is by no means the mind, nor can an idiot bereft of the latter be called a soulless being. To describe, as the physiologists do, the human soul in its relations, senses, and appetites, desires, and passions, common to man and the brute, and then endow it with godlike intellect. The spiritual and rational faculties, which can take their source but in a supersensible world, is to throw forever the veil of an impenetrable mystery over the subject. Yet in modern science, psychology and psychism relate only to conditions of the nervous system, mental phenomena being traced solely to molecular action. The higher noetic character of the mind principle is entirely ignored and even rejected as a superstition by both physiologists and psychologists. Psychology, in fact, has become a synonym in many cases for the science of psychiatry. Therefore, students of Theosophy, being compelled to differ from all these, have adopted the doctrine that underlies the time-honored philosophies of the East. What it is may be found further on. To better understand the foregoing arguments and those which follow, the reader is asked to turn to the editorial in the September Lucifer, The Dual Aspect of Wisdom, page 3, and acquaint himself with the double aspect of that which is termed by St. James in his third epistle at once the devilish terrestrial wisdom and the wisdom from above. In another editorial, Cosmic Mind, it is also stated that the ancient Hindus endowed every cell in the human body with consciousness, giving each the name of a god or goddess. Speaking of atoms in the name of science and philosophy, Professor Ladd calls them in his work supersensible beings. Occultism regards every atom as an independent entity and every cell as a conscious unit. It explains that no sooner do such atoms group to form cells than the latter become endowed with consciousness, each of its own kind, and with free will to act within the limits of law. Nor are we entirely deprived of scientific evidence for such statements, as the two above named editorials well prove. More than one learned physiologist of the golden minority in our own day, moreover, is rapidly coming to the conviction that memory has no seat, no special organ of its own in the human brain, but that it has seats in every organ of the body. No good ground exists for speaking of any special organ or seat of memory, writes Professor G.T. Ladd. Every organ, indeed, every area, and every limit of the nervous system has its own memory. The seat of memory, then, is assuredly neither here nor there, but everywhere throughout the human body. To locate its organ in the brain is to limit and dwarf the universal mind and its countless rays, the manasa putra, which inform every rational mortal. As we write for Theosophists, first of all, we care little for the psychophobia prejudices of the materialists who may read this and sniff contemptuously at the mention of universal mind and the higher noetic souls of memory. But what is memory, we ask? Both presentation of sense and image of memory are transitory phases of consciousness, we are answered. But what is consciousness itself, we ask again. We cannot define consciousness, Professor Ladd tells us. Thus, that which we are asked to do by physiological psychology is to content ourselves with controverting the various states of consciousness by other people's private and unverifiable hypotheses, and this on questions of cerebral physiology, where experts and novices are alike ignorant. To use the pointed remark of the said author, hypothesis or hypothesis, then we may as well hold on to the teachings of our seers as to the conjectures of those who deny both such seers and their wisdom. The more so we are told by the same honest man of science that if metaphysics and ethics cannot properly dictate their facts and conclusions to the science of physiological psychology, in turn, this science cannot properly dictate to metaphysics and ethics the conclusions which they shall draw from facts of consciousness by giving out its myths and fables in the garb of well-ascertained history of cerebral processes.
Okay, let's stop. This Professor Ladd that she keeps referring to was a professor of philosophy at Yale at the time. Yeah. And so, like in a lot of her articles like this one, what she will do is point out the general idea, like here in physiology, psychology, but then she'll also use well-respected scientists that are saying, yeah, but that's not really how everybody sees it. So that's why she's using some of these quotes from Professor Ladd, because he's closer to the idea of what the occult teaching is.
I like the part about memory. Since this was written, they've kind of figured out a little bit more about like what's going on in the brain, and it's like every time you remember something, you rebuild that in your mind. It's not like it's filed away, and that's why memories change and are unreliable, because you're getting it from somewhere else, and then you rebuild it in your imagination, which is like a little bit more advanced, but it still seems like we don't quite know how
that works. Yeah. Right. Well, the other thing that it's saying is like every cell has its own kind of memory, and then every grouping of cells has its own kind of memory. And we know that that's kind of true, because if someone's a musician or they're a sports person, there's a time where you have to learn what that you're doing. You're playing a guitar, you're learning how to play baseball. But after that learning period, there's a certain amount of muscle memory, they call it, that it seems like it works instantaneously. Like you want to hit the ball and you hit the ball, or you miss because the pitcher's better than your batting. But it's not like you have to think about it and try to do it like when you're first starting. And so there's there's a lot of evidence that points to what she's saying is true. And we could think of the mind that is working through the brain as aggregating all that information, and the physiology of us just doing it. We don't really have to think about digestion. The body does our digestion until we're not eating in harmony with the body, and then we get indigestion. It's that kind of thing that she's kind of getting us to think about. But there's also a big point that she's making, is that your soul has all this experience. When she said at the beginning of this article, the knowledge of past, present, and future is embodied in Kshetrajna, the self. That's this noetic self that she's talking about, or the reincarnating soul, the mind of the reincarnating soul.
Is that word Kshetrajna?
Kshetrajna.
What is noetic mind there and all that?
What noetic mind means in this, we could think of as your soul mind or your consciousness from all your experiences,
Of all different past lives.
all past lives.
Did you already say that? Yeah. Okay, yeah, it's the higher man's.
And that's, when I talked about the seven principles, what's really key is that mind is kind of the fulcrum between going to our higher spiritual nature and our life personal nature in this incarnation. So that's our principle, which functions through both. And it's just, how do we, probably 99% of the time, we're functioning through our lower mind. And our higher mind can send glimpses of free will to that, but it all depends on how receptive we are to it. You have for a certain amount of time, you might have a conscience as to, I should do this, I shouldn't do that. And then eventually some people lose that connection. There's nothing that they shouldn't do that they want to do. Everything is okay as long as you don't get caught. And if you get caught, you might be able to get a lawyer to get you off. That's the logic of lower mind, where the higher consciousness is telling you shouldn't do that. And it's not based on moral laws of where you live. It's based on ethics of universal laws. And so that's what she's meaning by noetic.
And yeah, part of ethics of universal laws, is empathy, being empathetic towards all human, all nature, all sentient beings. So, like you said, the mind, you can direct it one way or the other, and in all the seven principles, what they've been calling karma, or the desire principle, they call it like the balance principle. So you can direct the desires to your own selfish needs or to selfless needs, or universal, like empathy towards all the universal beings. It's interesting that Andy says too, you cannot define consciousness, because there was just a friend of ours let us know about a paper that was written by who's Norwegian, physicist, that was trying to define consciousness with the laws of physics. But in the article, it's a good try. It's definitely a good try, but I guess the article was refuted because part of the formula couldn't be proven. But then that's one, I think I mentioned it in one of the classes before, HPV says, you cannot prove this consciousness with physics, with physical laws on this plane, but because there's also metaphysics or hyperphysics. So metaphysics would apply to the astral realm, and hyperphysics to this spiritual or the noetic realm.
I just find it interesting when the kind of older text is later illuminated a little bit by science, with having consciousness in every cell might sound kind of bizarre. It's every cell contains DNA, which is not only our, I don't know about consciousness, but our everything is, and also all of our ancestors all the way back to the amoeba, so, and that's in every single, dead skin cell that falls off your body. A lot of the stuff where she was getting her information from, the kind of Indian, whatever you call it, Yugas, or not Yugas, but the Upanishads and stuff.
Upanishads, the texts.
They, the number a billion wasn't really didn't really exist in the West for a very long time, but they had it for thousands of years because they were thinking on these much larger timescales than we had really up until about the time of Blavatsky and Darwin and stuff. They didn't really know how old the world of the universe was. It's always interesting to me.
Yeah, that's why, she says it's a big part of the movement is studying these ancient philosophies and sciences, because although the terminology might be different, it's containing a lot of knowledge that later was kind of looked at as superstitious. But she said it's not really superstitious when you look at it in a particular way. It's really science and more of a poetic description. Anyone else? Read. Want to read? Okay. So ended at knowledge metaphysics.
Nonsense and metaphysics, yeah.
Yeah.
On page 20.
Okay.
Now, since the metaphysics of occult philosophy, physiology, and psychology postulate within mortal man and an immortal entity, divine mind, or nous, whose pale and too often distorted reflection is that which we call mind and intellect in men, virtually an entity apart from the former during the period of every incarnation, we say that the two sources of memory are in these two principles. These two we distinguish as the higher manas, mind or ego, and the kama manas, i.e. the rational but earthly or physical intellect of man. Encased in and bound by matter, therefore subject to the influence of the latter. The all-conscious self, that which reincarnates periodically, verily the word made flesh, and which is always the same, while its reflected double changing with every new incarnation and personality, is therefore conscious but for a life period. The latter principle is the lower self, or that which manifesting through our organic system, acting on this plane of illusion, imagines itself the ego's sum, and thus falls into what Buddhist philosophy brands as the heresy of separateness. The former we term individuality, the latter personality. From the first proceeds all noetic element, and from the second psychic, i.e. terrestrial wisdom, at best, as it is influenced by all the chaotic stimuli of the human, or rather animal passions of the living body. The higher ego cannot act directly on the body, as its consciousness belongs to quite another plane and planes of ideation. The lower self does, and its action and behavior depend on its free will and choice as to whether it will gravitate more towards its parent, the Father in heaven, or the animal which it informs. The man of flesh, or which it informs the man of flesh. The higher ego, as part of the essence of the universal mind, is unconditionally omniscient on its own plane, and only potentially so in our terrestrial sphere, as it has to act solely through its alter ego, the personal self. Now, although the former is the vehicle of all knowledge of the past, the present, and the future, and although it is from this fountainhead that its double catches occasional glimpses of what is beyond the senses of man and transmits them to certain brain cells unknown to science and their functions, thus making of man a seer, a soothsayer, and a prophet, yet the memory of bygone events, especially of earthy, has its seat in the personal ego alone. No memory of a purely daily life function of a physical, egotistical, or of a lower mental nature, such as eating and drinking, enjoying personal sensual pleasures, transact business to the detriment of one's neighbor, etc., has aught to do with the higher mind or ego. Nor has it any direct dealings on this physical plane with either our brain or our heart, for those two are the organs of a higher power than the personality, but only with our passional organs, such as the liver, the stomach, the spleen, etc. Thus it only stands to reason that the memory of such like events must be first awakened in that organ which was the first to induce the action remembered afterwards, and conveyed it to our sense thought, which is entirely distinct from the supersensuous thought. It is only the higher forms of the latter, the superconscious experiences, that can correlate with the cerebral and cardiac centers. The memories of physical and selfish or personal deeds, on the other hand, together with the mental experiences of a terrestrial nature and of earthly biological functions, can, of necessity, only be correlated with the molecular constitution of the various common organs and the dynamical associations of the elements of the nervous system in each particular organ.
Okay, why don't we stop there for a second? That's kind of a lot. He's talking about.
I think, we gotta give descriptions of that term, Prashna, itself, on page 22. Yeah. Okay, so what it says before the end of the page, the all conscious self, that which reincarnates periodically, barely in the word name. Also on page 23, at the beginning of that paragraph, the higher ego, and then 5 lines below, the higher ego, as part of the essence of the universal mind, is unconditionally omniscient on its own plane, and only potentially so in our terrestrial sphere. That is Kshetrajna, all of that. So that would be in ourselves. In ourselves, what is Kshetrajna? So it's that part that reincarnates, where all the memory of all the incarnations is stored. So that would be sometimes for the reincarnated ego too, which takes several bodies, or many bodies every time we reincarnate. So that covers that term, the Kshetrajna.
And the point of it being omniscient on its own plane isn't just because it's had a lot of reincarnating experiences. It's because that aspect of mind is universal and linked with everybody else's mind. So it's not just your soul experience that you are participating in, but it's the collective soul experiences of man at that level. And that's why it goes back to past, present, and future. But at that level, your mind is conscious of past events, which are causing the current events, and how those will be reflected in a future event, or karma, how karma is working out. Because you're not just aware of your own space in mind, you're aware of your own space in relation to everybody else's. Causality. You're on the plane of causality and aware. And that's the key part here, is that it doesn't matter what language you speak now or you used to speak. It's the understanding, and at that plane of causality, like just mentioned, language is no barrier because everyone is understanding. Part of the problem on this plane is we're trying to get correspondences from ancient texts of a language we don't know that has been translated into relative words in our language that have maybe similar meaning, but not always the same meaning. We're on that plane where we could say it's direct cognition, because we're on the plane of universal mind, and that plane is the causal plane reflecting through the lower planes. And it's not just limited to human thought, it's also the thought of the adepts that have past human experience. It's the thoughts of the beings that are kind of the governors of the universal laws, or the expressions of universal law.
Therefore, the passage of the Bible too, the word made flesh. It's using the term sound made flesh. So that's again that part in themselves that takes on a body, as the word made flesh. In this case, instead of saying the higher ego or Shutragna, it's using the word sound. The word is sound. So it's becoming flesh, making on a body. We can use that individually to the person, or we can use that universally. There's other parts where it says, speaking of the word, the Om, the sound, which is all creation becoming flesh, the universe manifested that would be flesh in a word, in a way.
It says, comic organs. What does that word mean, comic?
Desire.
Desire.
All right.
Yeah, so it mentions the liver, the spleen, the stomach. And in Chinese medicine, the emotions that go with that, like liver is more anger, frustration. The spleen is more like overthinking, and that goes along with the stomach as well. That kind of makes up like the solar plexus. A lot of times people will feel like, emotions or some weird feeling with something, and they'll feel it, or they'll have tension here or stressors, or they get a stomach ache if they're in a certain situation. They, maybe are aware that it's not just something they ate, but something they're feeling. And so, yeah, she talks a lot about like those organs are really associated with this lower principle. Whereas the one part that is talking about, whereas now the former is a vehicle of all knowledge of the past, present, and future, and although it is from the fountainhead, that its double catches the occasional glimpses of that which is beyond the senses of man and transmits them to certain brain cells unknown to science in their function, thus making man a seer, soothsayer, prophet. So where do you think those certain brain cells, if the comic ones are more the cells of these organs, where do you think those certain cells would be in the brain? If it's like linked to someone that's a seer, soothsayer, prophet.
Well, it kind of seems like it has to do with what Colin was saying at the very beginning of class with the like astral body and then the different. It might not be necessarily a one-to-one, but we have other bodies, and it's saying the double. It's kind of. At like these different levels, there's different kind of access to information that is not physical.
And that goes along with page 22 on top, where it says universal mind and its countless rays, the Manasa Putra. That means the sound of mind, which is us. We have the aspect, and so we are those rays. And its countless rays, which inform every rational model. So that means that those rays all here is that part of our mind. Therefore, the Manasa, which means mind, Sanskrit, and Putra means sons or son. So in some writers, we call the Manasa Putra, sons of the mind. So because we created ourselves from another aspect. We are creating ourselves every life, because we are sort of like, well, maybe not creating, but for lack of better words, we're creating these tendencies, and by doing these tendencies, I'm creating my future life. So am I gonna have these tendencies towards, selfishness? Then that's what I'll be. Or for being more altruistic, then I'm still, kind of creating those tendencies. So that would be creating myself, in this world in a way, because everything comes from mind. there's a phrase in Theosophy that the real plane of activity is the mind. And really, because when we think, there's something that has to respond to our thoughts. So it's like an energy, vibration. So that's where everything begins. We feed that thought, then we materialize that action. But we may have different thoughts or thinking, but Theosophy helps us to guide our mind on what kind of thinking or what kind of thoughts we have. And so the idea that Manasa puts us, that's in a way that we are creating ourselves. We are the sons of our own mind in a way.
It's also interesting where in the middle of that page where he was just reading, where it says, no memory of purely daily life function of a physical, egotistical, or lower mental nature, such as eating, drinking, enjoying personal pleasures, etc., transacting business to the detriment of one's neighbor, has not aught to do with the higher mind or ego, nor has it any direct dealing on this physical plane with either our brain or our heart. For these two organs of power higher than the personality, but not with our passional organs such as the liver. So she's connecting this noetic mind with the heart and the brain. But I think it's interesting if you think like a lot of religious texts or philosophical writings will talk about the soul is the seat of the soul is the heart. And so it shows there's kind of an ancient understanding that there's a different type of mind functioning through the heart than through just the brain. And when we, in some of the sections of the Secret Doctrine, where HP was talking about Atlanteans and how Atlanteans, their third eye was open, so they could see on these higher planes, which Atlanteans were us in former incarnations of us. So it's saying there's a certain connection here between the higher mind and the functions of the brain or in our brain that can either open us up to that scene where she's talking about seers or mystics later in the paragraph. It's under certain conditions governed by ethics and your consciousness that either opens up and you have, what's called the third eye, or you can see on inner planes, or you don't. But it's interesting that she makes that connection here with the higher mind functions more through the heart and the centers of the brain. And we know this other part where it's talking about the liver and the spleen. We know that doctors, if you've read through some of the effects after someone gets a liver transplant, a lot of times a person will get a liver transplant and have cravings for food that they normally didn't eat before. So that also corroborates what she's saying about the memory of certain organs and what's attached. And so it's a very unusual phenomenon that when they started doing transplants, people are like, well, what's going on? This guy never even had a McDonald's and now he wants McDonald's. Or someone always ate like cheeseburgers and barbecue and steak, and now they want Chinese and Thai food. Why? What's happening? And then it turns out the person they got the organ from, that's the food they like. And it's one of those weird facts of science and medicine that once they trace it back, they go, well, I guess it makes sense. The guy had a routine of eating McDonald's at lunch, and so now this guy has a craving for it. So it's interesting in that respect where when she was writing, there wasn't that kind of medical proof corroborating what she's saying.
Say it's similar with the heart transplant. The personality of the person that had that heart, and now it's great movie making material.
Yeah.
I've seen a whole bunch of, like, The Simpsons did a Halloween episode of that. it's great understanding of how that process works.
Yeah. And I think that's another, that's another part of our culture that some people pick up on and other people it's just like kind of interesting or curious or how they come up with that. But it's another part of our culture that you start seeing some of these ideas in movies. It's like, where'd they come up with that idea for The Simpsons, I mean, they came up with it from somewhere.
It's similar to what Roberta was saying about, your tendencies create your future, and that is even true in the physical plane of you eat cheeseburgers all the time, your body gets accustomed to that, creates people call it like grooves in your brain or whatever.
Yeah.
Something like that.
And you actually have cravings. You develop cravings. It's not just drugs and alcohol that creates cravings. It's certain reinforced activity. Just like someone that decides they're going to go to the gym every, 4 days a week, and after 4 months, they can't go to the gym because they just broke their leg. Now they feel horrible. It's like, oh, I got to go to the gym. I can't go to the gym. So it's an extra stressor on that. And so, yeah, we kind of don't always take notice of the power of our own programming until something like that happens, or the doctor said, yeah, you gotta cut back on the cheeseburgers. You're 32 and you're about a year and a half away from a heart attack. So any questions or comments? All right, should we go on? Justin, you want to read a little bit?
Yeah.
Good.
So 24.
Therefore, when Professor Ladd, after showing an element the system has a memory of its own acts. This view belongs to the very essence of every theory which considers conscious mental reproduction as only one form or phase of the biological fact of organic memory. He must include, among such theories, the occult teaching, for no occultist express such teaching more correctly than the professor who says in winding up his argument, we might properly speak then of the memory of the end organ of vision or of hearing, of the memory of the spinal cord, and of the different so-called centers of reflex action belonging to the cords of the memory of the medulla oblongata, the cerebellum, etc. This is the essence of the occult teaching. Even in the Tantra works, indeed, every organ in our body has its own memory. For if it is endowed with the consciousness of its own kind, every cell must of necessity have also a memory of its own kind, as likewise its own psychic and noetic action. Responding to the touch of both physical and metaphysical force, the impulse given by the psychic or psychomolecular force will act from without within, while that of the noetic, shall we call it spiritual and chemical, force works from within, without. For as our body is the covering of the inner principles, soul, mind, life, etc., so the molecule or the cell is the body in which dwell those principles. The, to our sense and comprehension, material atoms which compose that cell. The cell's activity and behavior are determined by its being propelled either inwardly or outward by the noetic or the psychic force, former having no relation to the physical cells proper. Therefore, while the latter act under the unavoidable law of the conservation and correlation of physical energy, the atoms, being the psycho-spiritual, not physical units, act under laws of their own, just as Professor Ladd's unit being, which is our mind ego, does in his very philosophical and scientific hypothesis. Every human organ and each cell in the latter has a keyboard of its own, like that of a piano, only that it registers and emits sensations instead of sounds. Every key contains the potentiality of good or bad, of producing harmony or disharmony. This depends on the impulse given and the combinations produced. On the force of the touch of the artist's work, a double-faced unity could be. And it is the action of this or the other face of the unity that determines the nature and the dynamical character of the manifested phenomenon as a resulting action. And this, whether they be physical or mental. For the whole life of man is guided by this double-faced entity. If the impulse comes from the wisdom above, the force applied being noetic or spiritual, the results will be actions worthy of divine republic. If from the terrestrial devilish wisdom or psychic power, man's activities will be selfish, based solely on the exigencies of his physical and animal nature. The above may sound to the average reader as pure nonsense, but every theosophist must understand when told that they are monastic as well as chemic organs in him, although the cells of his body answer to both physical and spiritual impulses.
Let's stop for a second. Here where she's talking about atoms, she's not talking about the atoms the way science has been describing atoms, because she says it's a spiritual, trying to see where it was in that. Okay. Therefore, let's see here. The cell's activity, it's about halfway down where he started reading. The cell's activity and behavior are determined by its being propelled either inwardly or outwardly by the noetic or the psychic force, the latter having no relation to the physical cell process, or the noetic having no relation to the physical cells. Therefore, while the latter act under the unavoidable law of conservation and correlation of physical energy, the atoms, being psycho-spiritual, not physical units, act under their own, just as Professor Ladd's unit beings. So here, she's using atoms, but it's not a physical, the way science looks at atoms as, physical, that put together, make bigger elements and molecules. Here she's calling the atom a psycho-spiritual force. So it's acting from you could say it's the building block, or it's the consciousness of what science calls atoms.
Even physical items aren't really physical, they're just kind of.
Energy forces.
I keep thinking back to the memory, how Ben talked about the lower mind memory, and the way that real memory works is reproducing like the situation, whatever happened in your mind, the sounds, everything like that. So it seems like all of these other kinds of memory, especially like we were talking about these memories in like the spinal center and things like that, it seems like those memories, the way that those memories formed, it would be a lot closer to like higher mind, because they're not going through the same like intellectual process or like logical process as our lower mind is trying to create a situation and things like that. So they're more to be trusted, I guess.
Like that feeling.
Yeah. Or just like nervous system memories, like impulses, instincts. Not impulses, instincts.
Instincts.
Yeah.
Marion, you have your hand up?
I do. I just was wondering on the screen. I'm reading from the screen tonight. I don't have the book in front of me. Colin, when you just read, is that on the screen? I was trying to find what you read.
Yeah, we just finished on spiritual impulses here.
Oh, okay, good. But I think on the screen it's a little bit. You have to scroll it back down, but that's okay.
Okay.
So it went from
Cell's activity and behavior.
the cell's activity, so it's further down.
Therefore, that's the paragraph, therefore. Paragraph.
Oh, don't worry about it. I should have the article, but I don't tonight. So
Okay,
I
we can,
Was it-
Oh, we're in the middle of that.
Well, really, where you want. Oh, that's like-
You guys can.
I had a question, but I needed to read that again, but it's okay.
read it. I'll read it. The cell's activity and behavior are determined by its being propelled either inwardly or outwardly by the noetic or the psychic force. The former having no relation to the physical cells proper.
Mhm.
Therefore, while the latter act under the unavoidable law of the conservation and correlation of physical energy, the atoms, being psychospiritual, not physical units, act under laws of their own, just as Professor Ladd's unit being, which is our higher mind, does in his very philosophical and scientific hypothesis. Every human organ and each cell in the latter has a keyboard of its own, like that of a piano, and only that it registers and emits sensations instead of sounds. Every key contains the potentiality of good or bad, of producing harmony or disharmony. This depends on the impulse given and the combination produced, on the force of the touch of the artist at work, a double-faced unity indeed. So the double-faced unity meaning the cells respond to either the impulses of our psychic mind or our noetic.
Mm-hmm. That's
There
what
she-
that's what
yeah,
my that's what my question was around. I'm wondering in this may sound like a very far-fetched idea, but I'm wondering in the case of a certain organs that are not healthy, if they're responding by the ones that, how did you describe it again? Sorry, I don't, the celestial forces or the spiritual, the ones that are how did you?
the spiritual or noetic or the
Yeah.
psychic.
Okay, so what I wonder if those respond to on the outward planes, in the physical world, to healing, rather than the cells that don't respond on the noetic plane. I'm just thinking about in terms of of organs that heal or don't heal. If there could be an occult reason behind that, like that this paragraph that you read, I sort of get these thoughts about this, or in terms of whether they're responding on in the what realm they're responding on. You understand my question?
Yeah.
First, you have to think about where the disharmony began,
Mm-hmm.
why the organ is diseased.
Yeah. See, that's the thing that she, and this last part that I read, she's talking about a very small, on a very, very small level, that each cell is its own being.
Mm-hmm.
Atom is its own being. And depending on its nature, it forms a group of cells, which eventually becomes what we say an organ, let's say a liver or a heart. Each one of those atoms or each one of those beings is also sevenfold, just like we're sevenfold beings. It has an aspect of Buddhi, has an aspect of universal mind, which is noetic mind, has an aspect of lower mind, has Kama, it has the life force going through it, it's electromagnetic, and then it has a physical cell structure, and it's all kind of animated through spirit or Atma. But it's at a very small level. In the same sense, you could say each physical personality is also sevenfold, but it's connected to the sevenfold of the cosmos. So my noetic mind is connected to cosmic mind, but also the noetic mind of the atoms in my organs is connected through me and influenced through me by my noetic and psychic mind. If my psychic mind is out of harmony, even with just my soul nature, that's going to create a disturbance or an inharmony, which eventually might show up as disease.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Hey, that's
Going
it.
back,
It's
going
almost
back to Ben's comment that we all have the same DNA.
Mhm.
Well, what we don't have the same DNA turned on and off. Each aspect of our own DNA. Some people have what do they call when you have a certain genetic code, and certain genes don't turn on for some people, and they don't get cancers. Other genes turn on, and they start getting cancer.
Mm-hmm.
They know that if you're a woman, you have a particular type of gene, your tendency to get breast cancer is much higher than anyone else, even men or women.
Mm-hmm.
One little detail that biology, physiology, and science has determined. They don't know why that gene turns on and off.
It's almost like the organs there's kind of multi facets or multi levels going on within the body all at the same time, but aren't necessarily all the same. Like, maybe it's the karmic, like the organs are under the law of karma.
Well, that's the point. Everything is under law of karma.
Mm-hmm.
But because you get a disease doesn't necessarily mean it's a karmic experience. Could mean that you just were in an environment that was very toxic.
Yes.
And because of the environment, either chemically toxic or emotionally toxic, that's causing a disturbance in.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, that's kind of the point I was trying to make, was that you could have somebody that's really a wonderful theosophist or whatever, a really a spiritually minded person who endeavors to be spiritual, but perhaps they have a different their organs. There's a particular organ that has a karma that it's causes or that perhaps not caused from this lifetime. It carries within the body from lifetime to lifetime.
Yeah, I think that's
From the tendencies of the
yeah,
past
from the
lives.
past tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, that's when we went over the aphorisms on karma, when the judge article on karma, there was different aphorisms. And one of the aphorisms is that karma can only manifest when the conditions are correct for it to manifest. And so a person might, and this personality, seem very spiritual and very compassionate, but in previous personalities, they might not have been, and now their karma is to deal with
Mm-hmm.
how they were in the past.
Maybe in a sense, it's a. I mean, it doesn't.
From our
It doesn't.
Go ahead.
It doesn't always seem like it's a good karma, so that's a relative word. But as you point out, maybe in a lifetime when the person is leading a spiritually motivated life, they're better able to work out the karma, and otherwise, if they had that karma before, or if it manifested at a different time when the person, let's say, had a different kind of a mental attitude or spiritual attitude, that karma wouldn't have been able to have worked out. So the bad karma sort of needed the spiritually minded person to like yours talking about having the right timing.
Yeah, and it's hard for us to really make any judgment from this plane. Because it also could be that the person going through that physical ailment, it's not even their particular karma. It might be the karma of the people that are around them that have to help take care of them. From this plane, we can't really make a judgment. But from this higher noetic plane, it would seem that that would be more understandable.
Mhm.
Because as like Andrew said, you're on the causal plane. So you're aware and conscious of what is causing the effects that are happening or are going to happen or have happened in the past on this plane.
Yes,
So it's very complicated
complicated.
from our perspective. But
Mhm,
the key thing is that we're all linked on that higher perspective.
mhm.
So under the right circumstances, we would be able to know at least part of it. You know, there's in the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna is teaching Arjuna, he makes a statement somewhere along the line. He makes a statement that, you know, Krishna is saying, I'm aware of all my past incarnations. You're only aware of this one and starting to get a glimpse of maybe one or two. And so that's the thing. We're in a position where we're not experiencing consciously on that higher plane where that information is active or stored.
I
But
I like your comment. Oh, sorry.
it doesn't mean that we're not connected to it. So that's
Yes,
yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say this seems a lot like ones and zeros binary code. In a sense, like genes can be switched on and off, and it works like how computers do their
calculation.
yeah.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
I think I really like your point about, Carlin, what you said about, you know, sometimes, a lot of times, the lesson, I guess you want to call it that, karmically, it's about the people that are around the sick person. And sometimes you see really wonderful things come out of people that are helping a really sick person. And then on the other hand, you see really bad things come out, where they might try to take over their money, steal from them.
Right. Yeah.
Those are like the karmic tests that we all get
Mhm.
in different situations.
Yeah, that's interesting. Thank you.
On the little footnote where I think it's in reference to the term force, but it says, we fondly trust this very unscientific term will throw no analyst into hysterics beyond recovery.
It's a serious word. Yeah.
Is that just sort of a Blavatskyism, or what's?
Yeah, it is, totally is.
Okay, I just wasn't sure.
Yeah, no, that's
the spice of.
Oh, yeah.
You know,
I think a lot of writers have after that's where they kind of learn some bit intellectual.
So, yeah, because you look at the other footnotes and they're just like professor from Yale.
Yeah.
Well, I think a good thing to keep in mind for all this, when she's talking about force, she started at the beginning where she said, force is not created, it's guided. Force is, energy is, vibration is. So it's what our job is, and what higher being's job is the guiding of that force to express universal ideation. And so the higher up the ladder of consciousness we're acting more and more in harmony by guiding that force, as opposed to acting at haphazard. It's, you know, if you're a surfer in this past week, you just decide to go surfing, you didn't check the surf report, you got to the beach, you're like, wow, these waves are pretty great, and bigger than normal. Now you gotta surf waves that you've probably never surfed in your life before. You're not changing, your expertise has to blend with the force of that wave. Your expertise isn't gonna change it. And it might totally wipe you out. You might not be able to even get on your board. Normally you're going to the beach and Santa Monica is cool. This week, a lot of people realize that, you know, those waves you see in Hawaii, and we didn't have Hawaii waves. We just had big waves that a lot of experienced surfers were having a really hard time with. It's just because they're in that force. And normally they can glide with that force. And so that's kind of what she's pointing out, even on this very small scale of the atom, what she says is a conscious being, on its level, it's guiding force. And if our influence on it is contradicting it, it's going to have a hard time guiding that force in harmony. And enough of that creates disharmony, which then affects bigger groups of cells in our body.
So how do we guide that force? We might think that it has to do with motive. We have motive. If I have the motive for just to gain personal, you know, whether it be power or everything for myself, I'm moving the force towards the psychic move, the psychic, what is it called? Force.
Psychic force.
Psychic force. But if the motive or the motive is not selfish at all, whatever you think and whatever you, let's say, gain, you try to offer that for the benefit of humanity, then that would be the noetic force. And so therefore, we, in every moment, we are unknowingly using that force. So the idea is to become aware and guide that force for the benefit of mankind. In the Secret Doctrine, she describes this force in 7 aspects. I'll just read a little bit about each one. And this is on page 292 of the Secret Doctrine. And she begins from above, always from universals to particulars. So the first force, she calls it para sakti. Para means more or beyond that. So it's literally the great supreme force of power. Then the second one would be Jnana Sakti, the power of intellect. But this is the real wisdom, not the intellect as we know it, intellectual, but this is the intellect and wisdom. And then the third one is called Icha Sakti. This is the power of will. We've been reading about the power of will, which is divine. In Sanskrit, it's called Icha Sakti, which is a power or a force. Sometimes it's called. Sometimes they mean different things, but sometimes they're the same. The fourth is Kriya Sakti. This is the power of thought. So which we all have. We're all thinking in every moment we're thinking. So that's why with the motive we have the power to direct that force one way or the other. It says a lot more about it. I'm just
Kriya Shakti you can also think of as imagination.
Right.
The ability to, in your mind, make an image.
Yeah. And the next one, it would be a Kundalini Sakti, which is the power of force, which moves in a curved path. It is a universal life principle manifesting everywhere in nature. And then 6, Mantrika Sakti, which is the power of the letters, speech or music, exactly, mantras. And for the 7, they synthesize everything with one word, and they call it Divi Rapriti, which is called the light from the logo. So you might say the light of Christos in the Bible, but this is the light. But this is not a light like we normally know. It would be the light of knowledge, the light of wisdom, in that sense. So there's a lot of ways to kind of understand while calling yourself a force, which we are in every moment using that force.
I think luckily for students like us, with some of that Sanskrit, it's usually kind of two source words that kind of make an idea of the Sanskrit vocabulary that Blavatsky used. So with it, it's like Kundalini mantra at the beginning is a big hint into what it is.
Yeah, and the thing about those forces are all powers of nature that we have. We just don't all use them with the power that we could. So the feats that you hear about a yogi being able to do something, it's all being able to use those forces consciously, forces or powers.
Right.
And yeah, being able to guide, being able to make an image so strong that it will manifest on this plane.
Right. And they
without,
correlate with
without getting a machine to make it happen. Which
Without a 3D printer.
without a 3D printer, without a lathe, without a molten metal form maker, which is, to a lot of people is a kooky idea. But most things that we have on this plane are made of carbon. Carbon is all dispersed throughout the whole air that we're breathing. But how do you draw it into a form and make something? That they're not going to tell you.
I think it's really interesting in those principles that they just like in theosophy, the correlations to like the Western esoteric and like a Western mystic will be the same thing with the power of words, the power of concentration, meditation, directing energy throughout your body. It's the same principle.
And vibration. We all know, like by listening to music, whatever kind of music you like. You might like death rock metal. Or you might like symphony music. But both of them have a certain power that creates an emotion. That's why you like it. It's a vibration that is registering with you and creating a feeling. And that's part of what a mantra is that having the right combination of sound and tone and rhythm puts a certain idea into force under, we could say, under universal laws.
And a lot of writings are really mantras. The Bhagavad Gita is the song of Blavatsky will be God. But it's a sound, a song, a mantra. But we read it in letters, and we understand words and everything. But it really, originally is a mantra.
It's just like the Egyptian Book of the Dead. The majority of it is mantras, these spoken spells, written spells. But then, it's not just the mantra. There's all these other levels, the writing of it and everything else. But like on its surface, it's like 200 and something spells.
So where do we stop?
Verily, that body so desecrated by materialism.
Okay. Great, sir. Okay.
How much longer was that?
When did we start?
We stopped on, I don't know what it is in your pamphlet. It said, barely that body so desecrated by materialism. The first break, in 25. In the book, it's on 23.
We'll continue with that.
Yeah, so I won't be here next week, so it'll be
We'll
you.
cover it, yeah.
And then on the 28th, we're not going to have class because there's going to be a play at the lodge on the 27th and 28th. Everyone's invited if you want to.
What time is it?
Just
It's open at 7 and plays at 7:30. It's Antigone, and it's like been changed, or not changed, but some occult truths and principles added into it. And everybody that studies here, like, invite all your friends. You guys can like come free. We're selling a healthy, good amount of tickets, so that's a huge theater. So feel free to bring your family and friends.
And
I'll send out an email tonight or in the morning. I didn't want to bury everybody in the weekend email, Theosophy emails. But and we're going to attempt to stream it. I mean, we have this platform. We'll try to get. I mean, we have some filmmaker friends that are part of it, so hopefully it'll be a decent stream. Otherwise, I mean, it'll be decent.
how long is the play from?
I mean,
7:30?
hour and 40 minutes or so.
Okay.
Yeah.
What is the name or title?
Antigone by Sophocles.
Okay.
The third play in the Theban cycle.
Hey, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks for
Thanks.
participating.
Thank you for the class. Thank you so much.